It started with a trickle, or more accurately, the sudden absence of one. I walked down to my creek one morning and found a section of it dammed with fresh concrete. No warning, no letter, no notice from the HOA. Just gray sludge poured into the stream bed like it was a sidewalk repair project. Karen, the ever-watchful HOA president, later called it erosion control. Said it was necessary to prevent runoff from damaging community property. What she didn't know, what no one at the HOA bothered to check, was that this creek didn't just run through my land. It kept going underground beneath the road all the way to their shiny new headquarters and fed their building's gray water system. So when she blocked my flow, she blocked her own. The moment their sprinklers sputtered and the toilets stopped flushing, the board realized they hadn't just violated my land. They'd sabotaged themselves. You could tell everything you need to know about a place by how the water flows. That's something my grandfather told me the first time I stood beside this creek as a kid, tossing rocks and watching them bounce down the current like little rafts. It was his land back then, 50 acres of tree-lined peace with a stream that curled through the center like it belonged to no one and everyone at once. When he passed, I inherited the property along with a quiet promise. Take care of the land, and it'll take care of you. The creek didn't run deep, but it was steady. Even in dry months, it hummed across the rock bed with this soft, constant rhythm. It fed a whole ecosystem. Deer came to drink, trout darted beneath the surface, herons stalked the banks like ghosts. Most people saw it as just a trickle of water. I saw it as the artery of the land. What most people didn't realize was that the creek didn't stop at my property line. About 100 yards past my tree line, the stream ducked under the road, specifically Ridgecrest Lane, which belonged to the local HOA. On the other side, it wound behind their administrative building, where a network of old pipes channeled runoff and groundwater into their sprinkler systems and restrooms. The flow wasn't obvious until it wasn't there. For years, I kept to myself. My land wasn't part of the HOA, and I liked it that way. No rules about mailbox paint or trash bins. No forms for trimming trees. Just me, my dog Murphy, and the land that had been in my family for 3 generations. But lately, things had started to feel watched. It began with letters. Community concern notice, they called them. Vague complaints about unauthorized landscaping and potential irrigation runoff impacting shared infrastructure. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I realized the return address came from the HOA building on the other side of the creek. Next came a visit. Karen Wellington, HOA president and clipboard enthusiast, showed up on a Tuesday afternoon while I was fixing the fence along the south slope. She didn't knock. She just appeared like a base shadow at the edge of my property, hair pulled tight, wearing that smile people use when they're about to insult your intelligence. "I'm here to discuss environmental compliance," she said, holding up a pamphlet like it was a badge. "I'm not in your HOA," I said without even looking up. She pursed her lips. "You may not be a member, but runoff from your property crosses into community land. That creek is affecting Ridgecrest infrastructure. We've had flooding near the admin building. Flooding from a stream that's been here since before the road was paved. It's not personal," she said, "but we may have to implement some measures for erosion control if you don't take action." She left without waiting for a response. 2 weeks later, the stream changed. I noticed it one morning while walking Murph. The water was slower, muddier. Fish that used to flick through the shallows now floated belly up. When I followed the flow upstream, I found the problem. Just past the bend, under a cluster of pine trees, someone had dumped concrete. It wasn't a construction site. There was no signage, no equipment, just a thick slab of gray poured directly into the creek bed like someone had tried to build a dam and then walked away. It wasn't a total block, but the water that used to move smooth and clear now fought to snake through a jagged cement wall. Debris caught in the cracks. The current slowed to a crawl. I stood there for a long minute, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with cardio. Then I turned around and walked straight to the edge of my property, where the old easement ran parallel to Ridgecrest Lane. That's where I saw them. A white truck, marked with Clearwater Contracting, idled beside the HOA building. 2 men in safety vests were loading leftover cement bags back into the truck bed. One of them wore the kind of boots that leave hexagonal tread prints, the same prints I'd seen near the creek bank. I snapped a photo. License plate, logo, everything. When I called Clearwater and asked about the work order, the receptionist, clearly flustered, read from a form. Erosion Control Implementation for Community Safety. Authorized by, Karen Wellington. Of course. I emailed Karen. No response. I left a voicemail. Nothing. So I went in person. She was in the HOA building's front office, sipping tea like it was a country club and not a converted trailer with drywall partitions. When I asked her why a contractor poured concrete onto my land without permission, she folded her hands and smiled. For flood prevention, she said. We had standing water near the south wall last season. Our hydrologist suggested minor stream adjustment could help mitigate future risk. You adjusted onto my land, I said. She shrugged. We only modified the portion that transitions into HOA jurisdiction. If there was incidental overlap, well, water moves. So do boundaries. That's when I realized she didn't just violate my rights. She believed she could justify it with jargon and a signature. Over the next few days, things got worse. The creek slowed to a near stop. The smell turned sour. Fish vanished. Birds stopped landing. Murphy wouldn't go near it. Then came the irony. The sprinklers at the HOA building shut down. First the front lawn, then the community garden. Toilets inside the building reportedly refused to flush. A maintenance worker from inside Ridgecrest told a neighbor, "Something's wrong with the water pressure. We think the intake pipe's clogged or dry." They were right. That little creek Karen poured concrete into, it didn't just run through my property. It was their source. Their pipes, installed decades ago by the original developer, siphoned from the underground flow past my land. That flow was now reduced to a dribble. They tried to choke my land and ended up dehydrating themselves. I didn't laugh. I didn't yell. I just documented everything. Photos of the dead fish, the smell, the sludge, screenshots of the contractor's invoice, video of the water trickling around concrete boulders. And then I called the county water board, because if Karen thought a little concrete could stop a creek, she was about to learn what happens when a waterway fights back with paperwork and a name on a deed that wasn't hers. That I've never been one to jump straight to lawyers. My first instinct isn't litigation, it's logic. But after standing ankle deep in the slow-choking stream bed behind my cabin, watching algae bloom over what used to be a living creek, I knew I needed more than indignation. I needed facts. So I hired a hydrologist. Dr. Calvin Monroe arrived 3 days later in a dusty SUV, khakis already stained with field work, clipboard under one arm, and a handheld flow meter clipped to his belt like a badge. He didn't say much at first, just nodded, looked at the creek, and immediately waded in with the caution of a man who's been knee-deep in more than water during his career. After 15 minutes, he popped back out of the channel, checked the flow data, and frowned. That's not seasonal. That's blockage. No kidding, I said, pointing to the upstream concrete bulge. They dumped that without notice. He squinted at the spill pattern. Impropé pour. No wipoles. Not shaped for erosion redirection. That's a dam, not a solution. We spent the next 2 hours mapping the full length of the stream, upstream and downstream, recording elevation, water velocity, and sediment buildup. He traced the flow beneath the road where it dipped into an aging culvert, then walked across Ridgecrest Lane and toward the HOA admin building. That's when things got interesting. "What's this structure pulling from?" he asked, pointing to a stubby irrigation control box beside the HOA's community garden. "That's their sprinkler system," I said, "but I thought it ran off municipal water." He shook his head. "This is a gray water fed tank. See that intake?" He followed a PVC line that disappeared behind a trellis. "That pipe's pulling ground-fed runoff, likely from your stream. They're not on city mains for landscaping. This system's been piggybacking off passive flow." "You're saying my creek waters their lawns?" He nodded. "We're used to." And then, "They had no business interfering with that creek. You block natural water flow in this state. You're asking for regulatory fire." That afternoon, Calvin pulled parcel maps and development permits from the county website. We discovered that in 1986, the original developer filed a stream integration variance, an agreement that allowed limited diversion of natural water into HOA systems under one condition. The creek's original flow could not be obstructed or rerouted without environmental review. In other words, the very system Karen sabotaged was only legal because it assumed nobody would ever do exactly what she just did. Armed with the history, we kept digging. A trip to the city planning department revealed no active permits for erosion control or stream alteration on file for the HOA. There was a single closed request from 2020, denied due to lack of environmental impact study. The clerk flipped through it, confused. Says here they wanted to reinforce the stream bank with gabion baskets. It was rejected. She paused. Did they do something anyway? Not legally, I said. Back at home, Calvin compiled his field report. Flow reduction over 40%, sediment displacement consistent with foreign material, zero hydrologic justification for the concrete structure. He flagged 2 major violations: unpermitted alteration of a natural waterway and obstruction of shared watershed resource. In his words, "You've got a bulletproof file." But we weren't done. I walked door to door that weekend, asking neighbors if they'd noticed anything off. Most shrugged until I got to the Fosters on Oak Hollow. "The lawn's been pooling," Mr. Foster said. "Never seen it like this. We thought it was a sprinkler leak." "Your property downhill from the HOA building?" "Yup." I looked at the runoff path. Sure enough, without steady flow from my creek, overflow was backing up into the low elevation yards. That water used to travel freely beneath my land. Now it was confused, sluggish, dispersing wherever gravity found a crack. 3 other homes had similar stories: backed up storm drains, sudden puddles in previously dry corners, basement dampness for the first time in a decade. Karen hadn't just hurt my land. She'd crippled their entire drainage system, and no one had noticed because she buried it beneath concrete and excuses. I documented it all. Photos of water pooling near air conditioning units. A time-stamped video of brown runoff bubbling from a storm grate. Screenshots of the HOA's own community dashboard, where a user had posted, "Why do the toilets smell weird in the office now?" Calvin's report became the spine of a growing binder. I added copies of the original 1986 stream diversion agreement, the denied erosion control permit, and a printout of the contractor invoice showing the concrete work billed under Karen Wellington, Ridgecrest Committee Chair. I included her email to me claiming minor erosion stabilization. And beside it, the full EPA guideline on protected waterways, highlighted in yellow. Any artificial alteration of a continuous natural watercourse must be reviewed and approved by a state-licensed hydrologist and reported to the Regional Water Authority. Karen had done neither. She hadn't just lied. She had potentially broken the law. The tension was no longer theoretical. The evidence didn't just suggest misconduct. It proved it. On Monday, I sent everything: Calvin's report, my photos, city records, and the complaint form, to the County Water Authority, CCing both the State Environmental Division and my attorney. Within 24 hours, I received confirmation. An investigation was opened. 2 days later, an inspector from the Department of Environmental Quality knocked on my door. She wore work boots and carried a surveyor's wheel. She didn't stay long. "Can I access the creek?" she asked. "Of course." 10 minutes later, she shook her head. "No permit. No vería autorización. This is a regulatory violation, possibly multiple." "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll be contacting the HOA." I didn't smile, but inside, I felt something like gravity shifting. Karen had poured concrete into a problem she didn't understand. Now, the current was pulling her under. The first shot I fired was silent. Just a certified envelope slid across a clerk's desk. Inside, a cease and desist letter drafted by my attorney, Jonah, addressed to Maple Crest Homeowners Association and, by name, to Karen Wellington. It ordered them to immediately stop all alterations, blockages, or diversions of the naturally occurring creek traversing parcels 14A, 14B, and downstream easements. It demanded removal of the concrete obstruction within 10 business days and threatened civil action for every additional hour the dam stayed in place. The second shot came 30 minutes later, this time electronic. I attached Calvin Monroe's hydrologist report and filed an official complaint with the County Water Resources Authority, copying the State Department of Environmental Quality, DQ. The subject line read, "Emergency, unauthorized obstruction of protected waterway, imminent ecological harm." By end of day, my inbox lit up with automated acknowledgments. Case numbers, internal routing notes. I thought I'd feel relief, but what I felt was momentum. A current stronger than the one Karen tried to dam. 1. The agencies strike first. Wednesday morning, 2 trucks rolled into Maple Crest. One stamped County Water Resources, the other State Deck Compliance. 4 inspectors climbed out, hard hats tucked under their arms. They didn't call first. They didn't email. They treated the site like a fresh oil spill because, in regulatory terms, it was. They started upstream, photographing the concrete lip, measuring sediment, taking water samples. Then they followed the drainage path beneath Ridgecrest Lane and through the HOA's manicure grounds. I watched from my porch as one inspector knelt near the admin building's foundation, tapped at a rust-colored stain spreading from a weep hole, and shook her head. Karen must have seen them too, because moments later, she came striding down the walkway in her trademark coral blazer, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language told the story. Karen gesturing wildly, inspectors pointing to clipboards, one of them finally producing the cease and desist letter Jonah had served. She snapped her mouth shut like she'd bitten into a lemon. That afternoon, the HOA received an official stop work order. All landscaping, drainage, and construction projects suspended until further notice. Fines would accrue at $2,500 per day if the concrete remained. 2. Damage behind the walls. Regulatory wheels turn fast once an order is in play. 2 days later, the county demanded a full interior inspection of the HOA headquarters, the same building whose sprinklers had sputtered dry. A plumber accompanied inspectors to trace the gray water intake. They removed an access panel and discovered the PVC junction beneath the building had cracked from sudden negative pressure. Apparently, starving the intake pipe of water made it flex, then fail. Mud had seeped in, clogging filters and backing up into restroom pipes. Repair estimate? $18,000 just to restore flow, not including replacing the muck-filled carpets or fixing warped floorboards. And that was before removing the concrete dam. News traveled faster than runoff. Residents woke to an HOA email blast titled "Temporary Facility Closure, Plumbing Maintenance." No mention of violations. No admission of fault. Just unexpected pipe degradation. But by now, everyone had seen inspectors roping off the creek and Karen arguing on the sidewalk. Whispers grew into open conversations on porch steps, next-door threads, and late-night texts. People were connecting dots. The dead fish, their soggy lawns, the porta-potties suddenly parked behind the admin building. 3. Karen's last offense. With fees accruing, Karen called an emergency board meeting, hoping to reframe the narrative. Jonah and I weren't invited, but Tina leaked the agenda. Update on erosion mitigation project. The meeting livestream, something the new transparency bylaw required, showed Karen at the podium, speaking in a steady, rehearsed voice. The concrete structure was a temporary berm, she insisted, reading from notes. Implemented based on an engineering recommendation to prevent downstream flooding. She held up a single-page bid from Clearwater Contracting. It lacked a seal, license number, or engineer's signature. Then came the board's questions, softballs, Karen assumed. Jeff Langston lobbed the first. "Do we have a state permit for that berm?" Karen stammered. The contractor assured me no permit was necessary. Jeff turned to the camera. "The DQ says otherwise. They issued a $15,000 violation notice this morning." The chat feed blew up. $15K? Our dues. Karen tried to rally. We had to act fast to protect the headquarters from another flood season. Tina, calm and firm, asked the next. Why weren't homeowners notified? Why isn't the berm on any approved project list? Karen's nails dug crescents into the podium. Planned to circulate a memo once the structure proved effective. At that moment, residents began posting Calvin Monroe's report in the live stream comments. Line highlighted. Intervention lacks hydrological justification, presents high risk of upstream stagnation, downstream starvation. Karen's last defense crumbled in real time. 4. The cost of concrete. The DEQ issued its full citation package that Friday. Unpermitted obstruction of a protected waterway, $15,000 fine. Environmental remediation fee, $32,000 estimated. Daily noncompliance penalty, day 3 onward, $2,500 per day. Total due that week, $54,500 and climbing. The HOA's reserve fund, already low after Karen's beautification projects, held just over $20,000. Facing financial freefall, the board called me. Tina's voice shook but remained steady. We can't cover the fines. We need a solution that won't bankrupt everyone who lives here. She asked if I would allow a certified crew onto my land to remove the berm under state supervision. I agreed on 3 conditions. All costs borne by the HOA, not by increased dues to residents. A signed statement acknowledging they trespassed and obstructed. A permanent deed restriction added to HOA bylaws. No future alterations to the creek without unanimous homeowner consent and regulatory approval. Desperation makes for quick negotiations. They signed. 5. Concrete comes out. Sunday morning, 7 a.m., Clearwater Contracting returned. This time under DEQ oversight. Instead of pouring concrete, they jackhammered it. I stood on the bank beside Calvin as slabs cracked, tumbled, and were hauled into a dumpster. Water seeped through the widening gap, rediscovering old channels. Within hours, flow picked up. By dusk, the stream mirrored the sky again, alive, reflective, humming. Calvin took new measurements, nodding with satisfaction. Velocities back to baseline. Fish will return in a week. Behind us, the HOA building hummed with plumbers digging trenches, installing filtration, and flushing pipes. The repair bill climbed to $40,000 before dawn. Sprinklers remained off, lawns browned. Residents joked they'd paint the grass green like a Hollywood set. 6. Karen's collapse. On Monday, Karen arrived at the office to find her key card deactivated. The board had convened a silent vote during the weekend's demolition. Result: immediate termination of her presidency, suspension of her voting rights, and recommendation for lifetime ban pending member ratification. She protested, demanded a hearing. Tina handed her a packet, screenshots of her emails ordering the berm, the DQ fines, Calvin's report, and a tally of costs. They exceeded $95,000. Liability the board intended to pursue personally if insurance denied coverage for gross negligence. Karen's lawyer, the third she'd hired since the fiasco began, advised her to settle. She resigned, effective immediately. Her final email to residents tried for dignity. I acted in good faith to protect our community. No one replied. 7. The final numbers. 2 weeks after concrete removal, the county invoiced the HOA. DEQ fine after compliance credit, $12,000. Remediation fee, $28,500. Actual cost. Inspection and administrative costs, $6,300. Civilly negotiated restitution to me for ecological damage and legal fees, $22,000. Grand total, $68,800. More than 3 years of HOA discretionary spending. The board filed an insurance claim, but their policy excluded intentional unlawful acts. They dipped into reserves, canceled a planned clubhouse remodel, and imposed a one-time special assessment, $150 per household, payable in installments. Residents paid reluctantly, but many wrote, "Thank Karen," in the memo line of their checks. 8. Satisfaction in silence. On the first truly quiet evening after the chaos, I walked to the creek with Murph. The water whispered over rocks, reflecting starlight. A single trout flicked near the bank, a promise of restoration. I breathed in the night air that belonged here long before any HOA, any road, or even my grandfather's fences. I hadn't shouted once. I hadn't chained myself to bulldozers or staged protests. I trusted data, law, and the simple truth that water always finds its course. Karen tried to divert that course with concrete and arrogance. The creek taught her otherwise. And in teaching her, it reminded every neighbor that tampering with what you don't own, whether it's land, water, or someone's quiet, is a debt that comes due with interest. I flipped a smooth stone into the current and watched it disappear downstream, toward Ridgecrest, under the admin building, through newly repaired pipes, right back to where the trouble started. Only this time, it carried no grudge, just flow, and a lesson etched in every ripple. The counterattack was complete, the unraveling finished, and the water, at last, was free. The headline hit the morning after the concrete came out, splashed across the front page of the regional paper in 36-point type. HOA chokes own water supply. Beneath it, a photo of the busted PVC junction under Maple Crest headquarters, muddy water pooling around plumbers' boots. The subheader pulled no punches. Unpermitted dam on private property leaves association dry, facing $70,000 in fines. Within hours, every TV station in the Tri-County area had a camera van parked on Ridgecrest Lane, angling for shots of the quietly gurgling creek that had sparked a political tidal wave. Reporters interviewed homeowners watering wilted flower beds by hand. They interviewed me on my porch, though I stuck to one rehearsed line. The creek takes care of us when we respect it. We didn't. That's the whole story. They wanted more, of course, but I let the document speak. Calvin Monroe's flowcharts and DQ citations scrolled behind anchors on the evening news while a banner read, "Damn shame. HOA president faces backlash." Twitter piled on with memes. Karen in a hard hat holding a trowel above the caption stream. I hardly know him. Yet the real eruption came offline at the special town hall meeting the HOA board scheduled for the following Tuesday night. 1. The gathering storm. I arrived 20 minutes early and still had to park 2 blocks away. Cars lined both sides of Ridgecrest Lane, residents spilling out of sedans, clutching printouts of the audit, the fines, and screenshots of Karen's defiant Facebook post. The community lodge, once used for potluck brunches and yoga classes, looked like a press conference about to detonate. Inside, folding chairs filled the hall in tight rows. Some people stood in the back, arms crossed. Others clutched manila folders bulging with grievances dating back years, garden fines, paint chip letters, noise violation warnings. It wasn't just about water anymore. The creek had become the last straw in a bale already crushing their patience. The board table sat on a raised dais, 5 nameplates glinting under fluorescence. Tina and Jeff shuffled papers. Diane, the treasurer, tapped a pen against her notepad. 2 seats remained open at the far end. One was for Karen. The other, Tina had asked, almost shyly, was for me to serve as an advisory guest. I'd agreed under one condition. No speeches, just answers. At 6:58 p.m., Karen swept in, late but purposeful, coral blazer freshly pressed, hair scraped into its battle-tight knot. Her smile was brittle, eyes scanning the crowd for allies and finding none. She took her seat, clasped her hands as if in prayer, and stared straight ahead. 2. Opening salvo. Tina called the meeting to order with 3 sharp taps of the gavel. We're here to address the recent unpermitted obstruction of Willow Creek, the resulting fines, and the leadership failures that led us here. Murmurs rippled. Flashbulbs popped. Press had been let in on a first-come basis and filled an entire row. Karen leaned to her lawyer, whispering. Tina continued. We'll begin with a brief statement from President Wellington, followed by questions. Karen rose, unfolding a single sheet of paper. I acted on expert advice, she began, voice lifting into the microphone. Our facility faced repeated flood threats. The temporary structure, labeled a dam by media sensationalism, was implemented as an erosion safeguard. Boos erupted. Tina banged the gavel. Order. Karen plowed on. The subsequent water shutdown was unforeseeable. Reports of negligence are overstated. I merely sought to protect community assets. She folded her paper, eyes flicking toward me. Furthermore, the property owner upstream failed to maintain adequate creek flow, forcing emergency action. Gasps. A woman shouted, "Liar!" Another yelled, "You poured concrete on his land." Karen lifted her palms. "I have emails showing I requested cooperation." I felt every eye pivot to me. I stood, my heart a slow, deliberate beat. "The only request I received was a threat of fines," I said. She never asked. She took. Applause burst across the hall. Karen's lawyer tugged her sleeve. 3. Evidence under the lights. Jeff took the mic. "We've all read Calvin Monroe's hydrology report. It contradicts every point Ms. Wellington just made. Tonight we'll enter it into public record." He stacked copies on the podium. Residents craned to see graphs and flow rate charts. Diane projected a slide. The original 1986 stream diversion agreement. Another, the denied 2020 permit. No autorization. No engineering stamp. "Clear violation," she said, voice trembling with suppressed anger. Then came photos of the cracked intake pipe, the DQ citation, and the mounting fines. Each figure flashed red on the screen, like tally marks on a prison wall. Karen's face drained of color. 4. Chaos in question time. Tina opened the floor for questions. Hands shot up like fireworks. "Mr. Foster, why did our backyards flood?" "Because you choked the creek." "Mrs. Rollins, you fined my kids for chalk drawings but dumped cement in a fish habitat. How is that okay?" A retiree waived a water bill. "City meter shows skyrocketing usage after the creek dried. Are we paying twice for her mistake?" Karen tried to answer, but each sentence cracked under a barrage of follow UPS. She blamed the contractor. Residents pointed to the invoice she signed. She blamed outdated plans. Diane displayed the audit logs showing she bypassed board votes. She blamed me. Jeff read my cease and desist letter dated before the fines, proving she'd been warned. The crowd's mood shifted from angry to disgusted. A chorus of resign rose, echoing off wood beams. Karen's final tactic was pity. "I volunteered countless hours." Someone shouted, "No one asked you to pour concrete." 5. The vote. Tina brought down the gavel. "Enough. Per bylaws, 1/3 of members may motion for removal of a board officer with cause." A man in the third row stood. "I so move." 20 hands flew up to second. Ballots were passed row to row. Karen's lawyer protested. "We request postponement pending legal counsel." Tina shook her head. "Emergency circumstances allow immediate action." 5 minutes later, Diane collected the ballots. Jeff counted aloud. 89 yes, 3 no, for abstain. He looked up, voice steady. "Motion passes. Karen Wellington is removed from the board effective immediately." The hall erupted, not in cheers this time, but in cathartic applause. After years of fines and fear, the community finally felt the weight lift. Karen rose, face blank, lawyer trailing behind. Cameras swiveled. A reporter thrust a mic. "Any comment on your removal?" She whispered, "No comment," and pushed past, heels clicking a retreat. 6. Turning the tide. When the door shut behind Karen, Tina exhaled and looked at me. "We need help," she said, voice cracking. "Will you advise us on land use reforms?" I glanced around the room, at neighbors once strangers, now allies bound by shared outrage. I nodded. "I'll help. First step, transparency. Every water decision, every landscaping project, public notice, full vote, ecological review." Applause again, but softer, appreciative, hopeful. A man I'd never met approached, hand extended. "I'm sorry," he said. "I defended the HOA last year when they fined you for the shed. I should have known better." Others followed. Apologies mixed with gratitude. Someone passed out homemade cookies, a maple crest ritual repurposed for celebration. Kids ran up and down the aisles, unshushed for once. 7. Rebuilding together. In the weeks after the town hall, task forces formed, a creek preservation committee, a bylaws rewrite group, and a water testing volunteer squad. Calvin agreed to train residents on basic hydrology so they could monitor flow themselves. The HOA's website added a public ledger of spending, updated weekly. The emergency key program moved to biometric safes, dual sign logs posted online. Tina proposed a new motto, stewardship over rule. It wasn't fancy, but it fit. Local news did a follow-up segment titled, From Confrontation to Collaboration, How a Creek Reshaped an HOA. This time the camera caught neighbors planting native shrubs along the restored bank, kids releasing fingerling trout supplied by the wildlife department, and me standing off to the side, shovel in hand, smiling as Murphy chased butterflies. Property values rebounded. More important, trust rebounded. The creek, once a quiet ribbon forgotten by many, became the neighborhood's pulse again. A shared resource, a daily reminder of what happens when one person's overreach meets a community's resolve. 8. Epilogue of Reckoning. Karen's final appearance came via certified mail, a signed agreement acknowledging personal liability for a portion of the fines, payable over 5 years. I framed the cover letter, an artifact of hubris humbled by water. She never returned to a meeting, never posted another lecture on Facebook. Last rumor was she moved to a condo downtown, far from streams she couldn't control. Late one evening, Jeff and Diane joined me at the creek bank. We watched the water glide over smooth stones. Fireflies blinked above the surface. Jeff broke the silence. Funny, isn't it? She tried to bury the creek to assert control. Diane nodded, and all she did was uncover how much control she never had. We toasted with thermoses of coffee and let the night speak for itself. Because in the end, the greatest public reckoning wasn't the fines or the headlines. It was the collective realization that real power flows like water, quiet, persistent, unstoppable once it finds its rightful path. And Maple Crest finally let it flow. The checks arrived in staggered envelopes, plain, cream-colored, no logos or apologies printed on them. Just numbers. Big ones. Restitution. The HOA, under new leadership, had settled. It wasn't just the DQ fines and the court-mandated remediation costs. It was a personal payment to me for damages to the creek, legal fees, and ecological loss. Not hush money. Accountability. But the real reward wasn't in those envelopes. It was what happened next. The first order of business after Karen's ousting was cleanup. Not just bureaucratic, but biological. I brought back Calvin Monroe, the hydrologist, this time with an environmental restoration team. Over the course of 2 weekends, volunteers joined them to rebuild the damaged creek bed. We pulled out rebar, replaced contaminated sediment, and rebuilt the natural curves using river stone and erosion blankets. Kids from a neighborhood planted native grasses. A local Boy Scout troop helped stabilize the bank. By the 3rd week, the water ran clear again. We restocked the creek with fingerling trout from a local hatchery, Calvin's idea. Let's give them a clean slate, he said. We watched as the fish darted from the holding tank into the current, quicksilver streaks returning home. The HOA, now run by Tina and Jeff with a rotating advisory council, passed a new set of bylaws. Simple but airtight. No alterations to natural water systems without full ecological review and a community vote. Every project requires permits filed with both the city and the DQ. Emergency key access protocols revised. Biometric locks, dual logs, homeowner alerts. And, written plainly in the final clause, any board member found engaging in unauthorized activity involving private land would be barred for life from holding office. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew the clause was her legacy. It wasn't personal vengeance. It was institutional memory. The tone in the neighborhood shifted. You could feel it on Saturdays when neighbors who once ducked behind hedges now waved from porches. They brought lemonade to work days, helped repaint the weather-worn community benches, started a compost bin behind the garden. HOA emails, once dreaded as fine threats, now announced creek monitoring workshops and town hall Q&As. It wasn't perfect. It was better. One afternoon, Naomi from 2 houses down brought over a folding chair and joined me by the water's edge. She handed me a lemon bar and asked, "So, is it finally over?" I watched the current wind between mossy rocks. A heron landed upstream, silent, still. I nodded. Yeah, it's over. Not forgotten, but over. Sometimes restoration doesn't come with a bang. It comes with steady hands laying stone, with bylaws rewritten in honest ink, with residents who learned to see the land not as territory to control, but as something to respect. And sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it looks like a trout returning to clean water or kids dipping their toes without fear. The creek was whole again, and so was the neighborhood. And me? I finally got to sit, unbothered, on the smooth log beside the water. No contractors, no clipboards, no noise. Just the sound of everything flowing exactly where it was meant to be. Peace wasn't won with volume. It was restored with patience. And the reminder that water, like truth, always finds its way back. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who shout or break things. They're the ones who smile while pouring concrete over what they don't understand. Karen thought she could dam up my creek to punish me, bend the flow of nature and ownership with nothing but arrogance, a signature, and a few bags of Quick Mix. She believed that paperwork, titles, and rights were flexible things, at least when it served her control. But she forgot that the creek doesn't take sides. It just flows. And when you block it for the wrong reasons, the damage finds its way home. In her case, it flowed right back under the HOA headquarters, and in every broken pipe, every shut-off faucet, and every fine she left behind. She tried to choke my land and ended up dehydrating her own power. I want to hear from you now. Has anyone ever tried to block or damage something that was rightfully yours? Your space, your home, your peace? Drop it in the comments. Let's call it what it is, overreach. And let's learn how to fight it the right way. Because if someone tries to control your land, your water, or your peace, don't shout. Don't wrestle in the mud. Just gather the truth. Let flow. And watch them drown in their own mistake. Because in the end, you don't need to force justice. You just have to clear the channel and let it return.